Gosh, this is so nice. It is so always great to be home in Grapevine. I'm going to pull up my notes here. I'm getting to the age where I have to have notes in very large print. Okay, so let me see if I can pull everything up here. Apologize for that. Now I know where I am. Okay, so thank you for having me back here. I last spoke to this group 9 years ago when Tommy Simmons called me up and asked me to speak on the history of banking in Grapevine. And so I managed to scrape that together and come do it. And when he called me up again a couple of years ago and said, would you come back and talk more on that topic, I kind of had to say, you know, I didn't know that much then, and I haven't gotten any smarter, and I don't think that's a good idea, but I do have a counter proposal. As some of you know, my dad, Joe Box, was inducted into the Grapevine High School Walk of Honor a couple of years ago. And in researching for that nomination, I got fascinated with a period of history right after World War II in Grapevine. And so tonight, it turns out there's a very good bookend for that talk. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about the history of Grapevine from 1945 to 1965. Now there's, from the vantage point of age, which I have a lot of now, I can look back and see that period of history and think about those battle-tested young men came home. They would have been in their 20s and 30s, and they would have been the young bucks who were ready to have their turn at bat. Because that's the way the generational wheel turns. It just is. And they're coming home with all of that youthful drive and confidence that they had gained in all of their experiences, set up a kind of a push and pull dynamic between the youthful drive for change and the comfortable, comfort with the way things are kind of dynamic. And that push and pull would play out particularly strongly in those years that came out just after the war. So we're starting in 1945. There's a natural bookend in 1965, actually from September to September. If you haven't guessed what that September of 1965 date is all about, I think you will catch on as we go along. Here we are. I picked a period of history that I was interested in, and I had this brilliant idea, rather than starting out with an agenda, that I would, what better way to understand the history of Grapevine in those years than through the pages of our beloved Grapevine Sun. So, brilliant idea was, I'll read every issue of the Grapevine Sun for 20 years. Which was a brilliant thing, and it's all available online on archives in fuzzy print that is hard to read. So there's several caveats. First caveat is that was a lot of reading, and so I made an executive decision to read the front page of every issue, because after all, if it's not on the front page, we don't care about it anyway, right? So the second caveat is, while I did try to look for stories that were interesting or important, or poignant, or just hilarious, my selection process to boil 20 years down to, a small speech is totally arbitrary and totally subjective, and so this presentation is totally arbitrary and subjective, so bear with me. Third caveat, in stopping at 1965, I was forced to leave out a very important column that came along just a couple of years after that, written by an ace high school reporter named Rick Cooper, who happens to be my partner, and he's back there. It was called Rick's Rack, and I'm so sorry that I can't address that today, but maybe another time. And finally, you need to know that I am an old English teacher. I am the world's most obnoxious proofreader. I love words. I have a weird sense of humor. So I'm just setting the stage. So let's get started. First of all, show of hands, how many of you actually read the Grapevine Sun back in the day? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. For those of you who didn't have that privilege, for the years we're talking about, those 2 decades, and from 1895 to 1977 when the Keeling family sold the paper, our little 4-page, 8-column, family-owned and operated paper every week brought us their version of all the news that was fit to print. So, we start with September 1945, and that takes us right to the very moment of the end of the war. One of the most important columns that was in the paper in 1945 was called From the Mayor, and it was written by B.R. Wall, who had been the mayor on and off again for 25 years since 1912. Which means that Mayor Wall had seen Grapevine through 2 world wars and a Great Depression. So it's probably no wonder that his weekly column kind of had this hunkered down, old school tone about what he called our thriving and thrifty little city. His column was kind of had a lot of free flow opinions and commentary every week on many of the problems that were facing the community. Some of those comments were meant to be practical. For example, he really thought that we should be grazing cattle, sheep, and goats on highway right-of-ways in order not to waste feed, which probably tells you all you need to know about the amount of vehicular traffic in those days. He also suggested that the Back to the Farm movement was the most expedient way to solve the housing problem, which was actually very dire after World War II, and especially when the baby boom started coming along. One thing that happened is the schools had a hard time getting new teachers enough to cover all the students because there simply wasn't a place to live in Grapevine for teachers moving in. Some of the mayor's comments were wishful thinking, as in this quote, and I have to stop because I had to have a boom mic because I have to have my hands free. I will do a lot of air quoting, but there is nothing ironic about these air quotes. If I quote it, the paper is quoting it, just to let you know. So this quote from Mayor Wall is, "Some public-spirited citizen could do a righteous act by taking care of us in his will." City planning, right? But in the meantime, we're going to have to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. By the way, a little side note, I don't want to leave this out. B.R. Wall was not only the mayor for all those years, he started the Grapevine Sun in 1895, just to let you know. So the thing that struck me most, kind of the tone about things in those days, was even though the war was over, if you read the paper, you still had the feeling that it was still wartime. Inflation, shortages of goods were still major issues that were very worrisome to people. Occasionally you still had articles that would tell you how you could still use your war ration coupons to buy commodities like sugar. There were two of the regular local columns from that period were With Our Grapevine Boys in Service and Recently Discharged. I tracked those things very carefully. But lots of the things on the front page seemed to be syndicated features, and those all also tell you the tale of the times. A recurring column was veterans' problems, and reminded you that then, as in today, veterans often have a difficult time reintegrating into society. Soil conservation, that one ran for decades. Farm and ranch chatter. And the bigger world came to us through Walter Winchell and his gossip column, and Washington Merry-Go-Round by Drew Pearson. So times were tough in Grapevine in those days, but as an ad that appeared regularly on the front page reminded us, fine foods at Dan and Ruth's are not expensive. Well, whether it was syndicated columns or whether our local editor just had a flair, I started looking and seeing that the headlines, there were a lot of headlines that were just irresistible, and so I started collecting headlines, and throughout the speech tonight I'm going to give you a selection of headlines I love from those days. So here's our first installment. Farmers have interesting meeting. Pigs in the clover. Tomorrow may be too late. Have we complied with sanitary recommendations? Dust off the hoe and rake. I like this one. Any dairy record beats guesswork. And here's a favorite. How much gravy? Think about it. How about spuds as feed? Pickled peaches. Life after 40, more complicated. Take it easy, Mr. Pedestrian. Big thoughts. I haven't time. Make lard at home. And facts behind the black-eyed pea. But of course, we all know the reason everybody read the Grapevine Sun. It was because of all those snippets that told us about people's coming and goings. Because the Grapevine Sun really was the Facebook of its day. But unlike all our posting on Facebook, the Sun often had to give its readers a little nudge, as Margaret referred to, this snippet from August of 1948. When you have guests or go places, we and your friends would like to know about it. If your visitors are not mentioned, remember, it is impossible for Mrs. Wells to call every name in the phone book every week. Just call 85 and ask for Irene. In the late 40s, it seems to have taken a lot of work to remind the citizens of Grapevine about their civic responsibilities. And frankly, as you read the paper, there's just a lot of nagging in the headlines. For example, the Grapevine Cemetery, which we were just talking about, was always strapped for cash and begging for donations. And they documented every donor, every $1 and $2 donor. They printed the list every week, probably to guilt other people into giving, right? But they had a style that was very distinctive, as in these headlines from the late 40s to the early 1950s. Are there only 68 persons interested? Are there only 84 persons interested? Only 5 more contributions. Are there only 81 persons interested in Grapevine Cemetery? Only 11 more persons interested in Grapevine Cemetery. And this one, I don't know where it came from. Let George do it. And finally, the more generic Cemetery Association. And I'm pleased that that week my grandfather gave $5 to the Cemetery Association. Then there's a whole category I like to call hogs and dogs. March 28, 1948, quoting from the paper. A number of requests have been received by the city officials to eliminate all feeding of hogs inside the city limits. If this practice is not voluntarily discontinued, the city ordinances prohibiting this will be enforced. 3 months later, June 4th, 1948, city officials are all like, no, we really mean it this time. Headline, Health Ordinance to be enforced. Mayor Floyd Deacon. It has come to the attention of the city officials that we have not had complete voluntary cooperation in regards to moving all hogs out of the city limits. We now figure that plenty of time has elapsed, and we intend to enforce the ordinances regulating this if necessary. And this one from July 6th of 1950, when they really got real. Warning. Recently, the city of Grapevine had a dog vaccinating campaign. We received very little response. Now, it is our duty to protect the children of Grapevine. There is nothing else for us to do except start killing dogs. Don't blame us if your dog doesn't come home. signed the mayor and the city council. But it wasn't all dog killing. Grapevine was booming. It was baby booming. And in 1949, city leaders decided that there should be a census. And they announced a headline, "Noses will be counted." But the census was not done by the local government. It was done by the Lions Club with the help of the high school homemaking department. They counted 1,630 noses, including, and I quote here, including the Negro sections which rightfully belong in a census count. Civic organizations were really becoming more and more involved in the life of the city in all facets. And in February of 1950, there was this headline, "Businessmen form Chamber of Commerce." And the Chamber of Commerce was just in time to start promoting some exciting potential developments, like this one that was in a headline from March of 1951. Hopes renewed for Grapevine as site of Air Force Academy. And those hopes lived on for several years. On January 28th of 1954, House passes bill to create Air Academy, which was actually a reprint from the New York Times, and that was not a byline you saw in the Grapevine Sun very often. But part of that said, Grapevine is one of the sites under consideration. Well, you know how that turned out. But in the pages of Grapevine Sun, came to a conclusion 6 months after that, June 10th of 1954. There was no headline. There was no article. All there was a one-liner buried in the middle of the column that made its debut in that very issue. Zena Oxford, writing in The Grapevine, said, "Well, we didn't get the Air Force Academy." Well, we didn't get the Air Force Academy, but we did get the lake. As early as March of 1946, Mayor Wall, kind of toward the end of his final tenure, was looking ahead with a slightly pessimistic view, and he was quoted, "One of our major industries will be the manufacture of cement building block and tile, if the proposed lake does not put all our gravel pits out of business." But you can't stop progress. And in October of 1947, this was in the paper, "As Grapevine awaits erection of the dam, a mild real estate boom has broken out. But many buyers are waiting to see where the actual water lines will be." So finally, the big day comes, December 5th, 1947. It's a big news day. And a sample of that day's headlines from the Grapevine Sun. Many out-of-town visitors expected to attend groundbreaking ceremonies and barbecue. Dirt turning set for dam at Grapevine Friday. Extra edition today at 5 p.m. 585th Air Force Band to play for Grapevine Lake ceremony this afternoon. And last but not least, donkey basketball game tonight at 7:30. Following stories as they spun out from week to week kind of became a nice little detective activity for me, and that was fun. But sometimes led me places I wasn't really prepared to go, like these continuing dispatches from January to July of 1951 concerning Franklin Butner, who was a young man, local young man serving in the service. January 18th, 1951. Friends meet in Korea. Private Franklin E. Butner of the 1st Marine Division spent last weekend with a friend, PFC Charles Pourret, also of the 1st Marine Division in Korea. They had not seen each other in 5 years. Butner says they are now foxhole buddies. Again, they're quotes, not mine. May 31st, 1951. Local soldier in Korea gets promotion. 1 week later, June 7th, 1951. Corporal Butner, wounded in Korea. July 19th, 1951. Corporal F.E. Butner, killed in Korea. And in the same edition, letter of sympathy received by Mrs. Buckner. A letter from Corporal Buckner's CO was printed in its entirety. It's a lovely letter. Okay, we'll take a moment and we'll lighten the mood a little bit with the second installment of Headlines I Love. This is your local paper telling you things to help your life, right? Iron a shirt in 5 minutes. Do not clean clothes with gasoline at home. Aged Masons Orchestra presents program here. Have a sandwich. Bag the bagworm. People and potatoes. Tarrant County Oddfellow Roundup. Worse and more of them. Grasshoppers. Go to Sunday school. Beans, beans, beans. Don't let death take your holiday. A couple to watch. Horseflies and Lone Star ticks. Do you smoke in bed? Be in style, but practical. And this grammatical abomination. Cleanliness in cafes urged to insist upon. A Grapevine, as you might expect, had a vibrant social life. We had, in addition to all the clubs and all the church groups who were always having parties, Grapevine-ites found a dozen of unique ways to celebrate. There were lawn parties, patio parties, fish fries, hamburger fries, watermelon parties, and ham festivals. There were leap year parties, backward parties, farewell and going away parties, basket picnics, Western parties, hobo parties, and spinster dinners. And then again, a few social events were just downright curious, as in this one from August 1948. Mrs. R.W. Terrell gave a slumber party honoring her daughter-in-law to be. I had the same reaction. June 11th, 1963. Party honors Mrs. Tommy Edson. The lawn of the Kleber-Lipscomb home was the setting for a cousin's party honoring Mrs. Tommy Edson, who entered Harris Hospital Friday for surgery. And then some just captured the grapevine that we all know and love, like this example from May of 1951. Mr. and Mrs. Jess Stockstill honored Miss Wynell Seal, who was a June graduate, with a wiener roast Saturday night. Games were directed by Mr. and Mrs. Harold Lichtenwald. Wieners and all the trimmings were served to 38 guests, and fun was had by all. So kind of as we meander along in history, by the 50s, that pall of the post-war was noticeably starting to lift, and there was a new energy and a new optimism. These headlines from April 30th of 1953 kind of captured that spirit in my reading. First one, airport at Euless attracts thousands. How many of you used to go to Amon Carter Field? It was a wonderful place. 4,155 cars crossed dam during last weekend. That's a lot of cars. And of course, the inevitable, Dallas man, first casualty at Lake. And while folks were flocking to all the local sites, there were other stories that reminded us that things were going on in the larger world around us, as in this headline from June 5th of 1952. Kenneth P. Autry sees atomic explosion in Nevada. He is one of 1,000 men who saw the dawn detonation while crouched in a foxhole less than 4 miles from the blast. The detonation sent a blinding flash of light over hundreds of square miles of the Nevada desert. And this one from March 17th of 1955. FHA to help with civil defense. Now that we are faced with the terrible thought of war, what steps are being taken to prevent atomic attacks? Who here was found their bomb shelter under their school desk? Good thing. But one thing I loved is that we had all these local study clubs, and they were always kind of tapped into what was going on in the world. And I'm pleased to report that on January 21st of 1954, the Bayview reported that Mrs. Goad gave an interesting paper on the atom in peace and what it will do for science, industry, medicine, and even farming. As I've said, trying to compress, I have a notebook full of notes, and trying to select what to leave in and what to leave out was really hard, but I've kind of some random selections here about life in Grapevine. Keep going back to that theme of the push and pull of progress and people who are quite comfortable with the way things are. These two headlines a week apart kind of epitomized some of that stop and start progress. On November 29th of 1951, does Grapevine want a park? The Lions Club had formed a park promotion commission. Well, the answer apparently came 1 week later, in December 6, 1951, when it said, "Park plans move along." And this headline, one of my favorites, which is not actually reporting a crime. JC's attack youth center, need money. Speaking of questionable reporting about civic activities, if you'll notice this disconnect between the headline of the article and what they actually lead with in the first paragraph. 2 men injured in donkey ball game, and yes, this is another donkey ball game. There were a lot of them. Those who did not see the donkey ball game played last Thursday between the JCs and the fire department missed a lot of laughs. In most instances, it was a test of determination of who would give in first, the man or the donkey. Second paragraph. After Edward Langley took a fall and received a dislocated shoulder, and C.B. Henderson came off the ground with his arm broken in 2 places, some thought it best that the donkey be allowed to keep his most stubborn of all creatures reputation. The fire department won the game by a score of 4-1. And this one, I just love what it says about community from January of 1949. Fire destroys home. The home of Mrs. M.L. Edgett was destroyed last Friday. Through contributions and work of friends and neighbors in the community, a new house was expected to be built at the same location within a few days. And this one, because I know all you ladies out there have been looking for these guidelines for a long time. August 17th of 1961, gas company seeking Mrs. America, who will be judged on her cooking and baking, menu planning, table setting, child care, community service, church activities, poise and appearance, and personality. Not much to live into. And then there was Zena. Maybe it's just me, but when Zena's column was in the paper, she kind of epitomized the voice of the Grapevine Sun for me, and certainly a very unique character and a kind of a role model as I was growing up. Now, her column was really not anything more than the same kind of things people have been calling in all of these years, snippets, but she did kind of have her own brand of commentary and a little bit of news reporting along the way. For one thing, she updated us on our very own Grapevine's one-hit wonder in February of 1962. Bruce Chanel, who we all know as Bruce McMeans, will appear on Dick Clark's American Bandstand on February 13th. Since his record, Hey Baby, went on the market in December and became a hit right away, Bruce has been on tour with Mercury Records. She also had an ear for the telling detail. Now picture for a minute weather in Grapevine in September, as you hear this. This article from September 12th of 1963. Thanks to all you girls who entered the Miss Blaine contest and made it a success. You were all so pretty, you must have made it difficult for the judges. We want to be sure and get this in print. Bill Powers said that next year, the Miss Blaine contest would be in an air-conditioned building or a cool place, or words to that effect. And she was also pretty deft in her cultural reviews, as in this one from March 17th of 1955. The variety show at the high school drew a full house both nights, and no wonder it was good. We aren't foolish enough to compliment any particular person or song, but may we just say that the all-male bongo number was one of the highlights. Although sometimes, in retrospect, her judgment maybe falls a little short. From 1957. Don't the new doors on the bank look nice right uptown? Well, for those of you who don't know that saga, I happen to know this. The bank building was designed by famous architect Walter Aufschlager in this beautiful Art Deco form, and they took away the beautiful original Art Deco doors and replaced with plate glass windows. In fact, I have the before and after pictures on the slideshow. I think we'll run that again. And, you know, a few decades later, historians would be horrified that happened. Fortunately, you can go by Dino's and see a fairly decent restoration that do look pretty uptown now. But yeah, Zena was caught up like the rest of us in the modern world. And this from August of 1961. We are delighted that a company as large as the American Tobacco Company is recognizing the value of advertising in small-town newspapers, and we welcome them as an advertiser. Lucky Strikes, being constantly advertised, are always one of the leading brands of cigarettes sold. Okay, and this will be the final installment of Headlines I Love. Chicken Club. Fashions in pneumonia. Farm to live and live to farm. This is one. Follow me on this one. Visits well he fell in at age of 2 years, which incidentally was 1894, so I guess it was a big deal. Then there's the subtle, should you reduce? And the more direct, are you too fat? Fly has no worth. Jack Morgan hit in eye is doing all right. And then back to this, if people only knew about flies. Science taught in junior high. Plaid pointers. And finally, they call me stupid. So, late 50s, we're moving toward the 1960s. What was becoming the Metroplex was pretty much passing us by. If you picture Highway 183, it not only connected Dallas and Fort Worth, but along the way it connected Irving, Hearst, Euless, Bedford, North Richland Hills, and all of those places. Grapevine, you know, up here, wasn't on the way to anywhere. We were scrambling to compete with other communities for new businesses that would help us grow, and we were actually scrambling for the land itself to grow on. In fact, in the late 50s, there was kind of a full-out annexation, Wild West land grab between all the municipalities going on. It got so bad that a few years later, the legislature would kind of rein it back in. But in the meantime, Grapevine was really feeling the crunch. And remember, we're already penned in by the lake on the north. At a city council meeting in February of 1957, quote, the main point of discussion was how to keep the city of Hearst from annexing all the property in the Grapevine area. The city of Hearst had practically fenced Grapevine in. In June 7th, 1962, Chamber of Commerce head, who was Ira E. Woods at the time, says, "It may be later than we think." Quote, "If any town in Texas needs an active Chamber of Commerce right now, it's Grapevine. We are going to have people running out of our ears before too long." Think about this. The area within a radius of 5 miles of the corner of Worth and Main is sure to see developments almost beyond our present belief. This is sure to come. We couldn't stop it if we tried. And in August 9th of 1962, can you hear the echo of Mayor Wall way back in the 40s with this headline, "Grapevine Operation Bootstrap." More air quotes in this one. The popular image of Grapevine has not been too good. It seems that this image has contributed to our failure to get several important developments in recent years. We must do something dramatic to dramatize the fact that great and basic changes are taking place here that should brand us as a forward-looking little city, rapidly preparing to take advantage of inevitable great events that are pressing down upon us. And finally, on the topic of annexation, this headline from November 14th, 1963. City Council approves annexation of the Hill. Is there anyone here who does not know what I'm referring to? Okay. Quoting from this article, "This was done in response to a petition submitted by the residents of that area. The city will now be in a position to provide water and sewer connections for a number of houses in that area, for which applications have been on file for quite some time. Many of those in this area earnestly desire a better way of life than has been possible under existing conditions." So, we've had this push and pull of past versus future going on, while the city leaders labored to make sure Grapevine didn't get left behind in this wave of growth and prosperity that was going all around. Most Grapevine-ites were really just going about their lives. We marked the passage of time by our birthdays, which were documented in the Band Boosters calendar, so you know not only yours, but everybody else's. We caravanned to football games in places like Nocona and Azle to cheer on the Mustangs. We watched or marched or rode in the homecoming parade every year. The civic clubs held their annual teas and flower shows, and students filled their lives with seasonal sports and UIL competitions and FFA competitions. And for a lot of us, the spring variety show and musical, which were, of course, ramrodded by the incomparable Isla Bickers and Madeline Hemley. The Sun chronicled our births, marriages, deaths, graduations, promotions, and even sometimes illnesses, though never our divorces. The city owned 2 patrol cars. In 1964, there was crazy talk about how maybe it shouldn't be a toll call to dial Louisville. We were still a small town until one bold headline changed everything. And that headline is the bookend of this 20-year trip through the past, and the ultimate example of the push and pull of progress. September 30th, 1965, in big, bold letters, Grapevine gets airport. But you can't understand that headline without the air quotes, y'all, because what this headline really read was Grapevine gets airport. And of course, the article in the Sun captured the moment perfectly when it said, Grapevine's destiny is now out of local control. And the town's slogan may one day be, Grapevine, home of the world's finest airport. The announcement last weekend that the Fort Worth Dallas Regional Airport site is so close to Grapevine created an atmosphere of mixed feelings among the residents. Along Main Street Monday morning, there was speculation as to what price would be paid for the condemned land, how noisy the planes would be, and how much they would interfere with television reception here. Other comments were from Robert Stark, "It's wonderful, but citizens must adjust." From Bill Reed, "Won't do anything but help." From Joe Box, "It's basically what I thought it would be, with two exceptions. I didn't realize it would go so far northwest, nor so far north. It will be a boost to Grapevine economically in the long run." Gordon Tate said, "We're trading hay, cotton, and farmers for airplanes, pilots, and stewardesses." Mrs. C.E. David said, "Excellent timing." And finally, tamping down the drama with a little bit of that push-pull balance, this comment from Mrs. Willis Perkle, who opined, "It's the least of my worries." A change, as we know, is constant. Sometimes it's so slow you don't even perceive it. Other times it's like it's all we can do to hang on and try to keep our feet on the ground. Those war-weary men came home in 1945 to a town that probably didn't look that much different than it did when Mayor Wall took office in 1912. My dad and his contemporaries probably couldn't begin to imagine then the Grapevine they would live to see. When I started this project, I was set out to look at a period that included a lot of my lifetime. I was born in 1951. Looking back from the age of 70, I found myself rereading the Sun through the eyes of the young me and the old me at the same time. And I find, as probably many of you have, that 7 decades brings a lot of context and a lot of compassion. Items like seeing that I was noted as being absent one week in Mrs. Waters' first grade class wasn't really big enough to put in the speech, but knowing that I was seen, that we were all seen like that was a meaningful thing. And seeing my parents and many of yours, as they led their lives, they showed up at our school events, they participated in civic organizations that they made vibrant and meaningful. They grappled with changing times and fought for a future that we see around us now. But I realize as we get to know in old age that they were actual real human beings who loved and fought and coped with screaming kids, had aspirations and burdens and passions, and seeing those lives as they were lived kind of between the lines of the Grapevine Sun, that was a meaningful thing too. We had the fun of bringing a younger friend of ours, Bonnie Miller, with us on this trip. And it seemed like a fitting frame for this speech that we've been able to show her so much of our past in the middle of all this growth and development and transformation. And I like to think that that's because the heart of Grapevine has been beating here so long, and because in those remarkable 20 years, when our parents and grandparents and even some great-grandparents had such big decisions to make, they made good ones. Reading the Grapevine Sun every week, you didn't often get a hint of the other realities of life, the failures and losses and feuds and scandals that we all know went on. But the Sun did deliver what we all needed. It bound us together as a community. And even in the face of the massive challenges that people faced during those times, in the pages of the Grapevine Sun, a good time was always had by all. Thank you.
He's the world's oldest teenager. He's still hanging around. He's trying hard to live up to the image all his old buddies are trying to live down. Dropped out to have his fun stuck while the decades run, still loves his local renown. Living the same old way, he'll soon be turning gray. When will he ever be settling down? still in fighting shape. He never checks his weight, fights and bets he forgets he's lost a few. Edge of the law, edge of his paycheck, edging toward love, itching for a fight. Those young girls in tight jeans don't know what he means. He talks of old times like they happened last night. He's the world's oldest teenager, he's still hanging around. Do-I, do-I. He's trying hard to live up to the image all his old buddies are trying to live down. Dropped out to have his fun, stuck while the decades run. He loves his local renown. Living the same old way, he'll soon be turning gray. When will he ever be settling down? Donna there, she looks such a sight. She'll talk with him a while, give him her sweetest smile, kick him out when she locks up for the night. So he goes on his way, she's got kids to raise, likes his looks, but knows it won't pay. World's oldest teenager, got no tomorrow. Working girls, sometimes they got no today. He's the world's oldest teenager, he's still hanging around. Do-I, do-I. He's trying hard to live up to the image all his old buddies are trying to live down. Dropped out to have his fun, stuck while the decades run. Still loves his local renown. Living the same old way, he'll soon be turning gray. When will they ever be settling down? Do-I, 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 do-I. Living the same old way, he'll soon be turning gray. Will he ever be settling down? Do-I, 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 do-I. Dreams, they seem so sure. Saint Cinderella always made you feel secure. She always promised you there was a prince on his way. So even though the mirror never smiled, he tried to keep believing through the tears she held inside, praying just a little harder to Jesus each day. Tell me, please. Won't you dance with me, Jesus, for the last hymn fades? I've been waiting on you all of my days, and I still got a dream that won't quite fade. A dream of love, a dream of love. Amazing grace. Oh, how sweet the sound. Amazing grace. Run while Mustangs run on a prairie that had no end, as if a man could walk on the moon and come back to his loved ones again. Young Mustangs run fast, run free, road ahead a shining prize. No dream too bold to come true. What I'd give to see once more those eyes. There on that sweet summer night, with the rest of our lives shining bright as the moon up above. One fleeting kiss, just a hint of the wonders to find. One giant step overhead as we ran by the light of the moon up above, leaving the past behind. While Mustangs run on that prairie that had no end, as if a man could walk on the moon and find his way home.